I am Debbie Silverstein. I am the state director of SPAN Ohio. And, we've had kind of a busy past year, and especially since January. Gosh, I wonder why. A lot of things have happened. Not all of them have been bad things. Some of them have been some good things. We have a bill that's been introduced into the Ohio Senate, the Ohio Health Plan, and it's Senate Bill 91. And we picked up an additional co-sponsor this year, so that's a good thing. That's moving forward. The Expanded and Improved Medicare for All Act, H.R. 676, was reintroduced into Congress this year by Representative John Conyers, and that has more co-sponsors than it has ever had. Okay. Then the next thing that is good is in March, and this was citizen involvement, this was people's action, we shut down repeal and replace. We shut it down in March, and we're going to shut it down in May. Okay. In a conference call on Thursday with Steny Hoyer, they said they expect it to come up next week again, that they're spending the weekend twisting arms and fingers. And our response, we want to keep calling our representatives. Our response is that the only acceptable replacement for the ACA is H.R. 676, the Expanded and Improved Medicare for All Act. Okay. And we have to be firm in that. And we don't just call once. We're going to call every day. Okay? Every day we keep calling and keep them busy. And phone calls really are the best because phone calls disrupt business in the office. They have to take the time to answer them. When they put it on the answering machine and the answering machine gets filled, you know you've succeeded. And that's when, instead of calling the Washington office, you call the local office. So don't feel afraid to do that either. Okay. Some of the congressmen here in Ohio that they want us to really concentrate on are David Joyce, if anyone's from his district, which is up along the lake. Mike Turner, who's from his district. We got a bunch of people. Yeah, stay on Mike Turner. The other one that they suggested that we watch is Bob Gibbs and Steve Stivers. So keep calling, keep calling, keep calling. Okay. Then, so some of you saw this. I sent out an email to our membership with this picture in it. And when I saw this picture that's up here, that really, really disgusted me. That we have 1.3 million people, almost, going on 1.4 million people in this country that have to resort to crowdfunding in order to pay for the medical care that they need. Only in America. That angers me. Our healthcare system is a total aberration. Not just the fact that people have to crowdfund and market themselves, but our healthcare system is an aberration in the developed world. It is immoral, it is unacceptable. And I hope that we're all here today, not just to talk about what kind of healthcare system we should have, but to pledge to get active to achieve the healthcare system that we need. We set a target date at a state council meeting 2 years ago of 2020 to get an issue on the ballot here in Ohio. Okay? We will need to launch that campaign in a year or so if we're going to do that. So we're going to need each and every one of you sitting here and all of the friends, family, neighbors, and even your enemies that you can drag along to get involved. Okay? Because all of us, it's going to take us all in order to do that. But we can make this a reality. We are learning a lot from campaigns that have been held. We learned a lot from the defeat in Colorado. Do you know Anthem Blue Cross of Ohio was the leading contributor to the opposition campaign? Your premium dollars at work. And here, poor Gerard McLean, our author, thought that he was the one that was bankrupting Anthem Blue Cross. with his medical bills, and then he finds out, no, it was Colorado Care that helped with that. So he couldn't take full credit. So, and we're learning from California. California's Senate bill made it through the first committee hearing on single payer. But the insurance companies are sending out emails, and we have a copy of the email that they're sending out in opposition. They're targeting seniors with Medicare and telling them everything they're going to lose under a single payer plan, without telling them what they're going to gain, which is plenty. So we know what their plan is, we know what their program is, and we've got time to really work with the people of Ohio in order to prevent that kind of propaganda from having an effect. So I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad that you're dedicated to achieving this and that you're willing to work hard to make this a reality. Okay. I would like to take advantage of the opportunity to introduce to you Gerard McLean, who is right back there. Gerard is from Englewood. He wrote a book, Dear Hillary, and let me take care of that. It's who I need to talk to, in a minute. And he is here to talk to you about his book. His book is a series of letters, 100 letters that he wrote from the time of her nomination till the day of the election, schooling her on single-payer health care. So you recall Hillary said never, ever, ever. But then she pledged to work for universal health care. And so he decided that she needed to find out exactly what that meant. Invited her to his house for coffee and pastries, but she never did show up. But it's the book is, while it's not meant that way, he can't help himself but inject a little humor into it. I think you'll find it interesting, and it's a good template for writing some letters of your own to your representatives. Okay. Next, I want to introduce Greg Coleridge. Greg is very well known here in Ohio for his work. He worked for a long time as the director of the American Friends Service Committee up in Northeast Ohio, and he is also one of the leading forces with Move to Amend, which is working to amend the Constitution and do away with corporate personhood. And Greg is going to be talking to us this morning about how the struggle for single payer has unmasked some of the diseases of our democracy and what we need to do in order to have a true democracy and achieve the goal that we have of health care. So Greg.
Well, I hope I don't get a nosebleed. I'm usually not this high, so wow, whole different perspective on things. Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. I appreciate the opportunity very much to be here, and thanks so much to Deb Silverstein and to the overseers and board and volunteers who have come together to put on this very grand event, and all of you to be here on the cusp of a movement. Well, it's actually been going on, hasn't it, for quite some time. But it seems like since November, it's gained even greater impetus for some very obvious reasons. You know, we all have stories, don't we, dealing with doctors and hospitals and insurance companies and dealing with drugs and all of that. And maybe you have shared some of those stories in your quest in speaking with others to call for a single-payer healthcare system. Those can be very powerful because they help put a human face on these issues and get it out of the head and put it more into the heart, which is where these issues need to be. I have a couple stories as well, a good one and a not so good one. As you can see, I am a person born with a disability. and was very, very fortunate in my hometown of Akron to have maybe the very best orthopedic doctor in the country who dealt with kids like me, born, as my doctor said, kind of like a pretzel. But through a series of operations, he helped me be not quite so much looking like Quasimodo. But nevertheless, it was quite an ordeal, which of course, in that time, that being 45 years ago, one that involved, as it always does, right? Doctors, hospitals, insurance companies. At that time, my dad, who worked for a fairly small company, couldn't have afforded the bills, but the company worked with him, the doctor worked with him, the hospital, Akron Children's Hospital, worked with him to make it work, to make it to where he did not, and our family did not go bankrupt, which otherwise could have very easily happened. That was then, very different times now. That was all in all sort of a good experience I've had with the medical industrial complex, if you will. Not a good story. Had to do with a couple of years ago, well, now it's bordering on 11, when my wife went into the Cleveland Clinic for a very minor medical procedure one day and was dead the next day. And worked, the hospital did, the world famous nonprofit Cleveland Clinic Corporation, to do everything they could to fight like hell, and employed their army of lawyers and worked to intimidate. And of course, this was in the era, if you recall, around early 2000, where in the air was a thing called tort reform. Remember that? Yeah. Where the corporations, not just insurance corporations or hospital corporations, but across the board, work to tarnish the culture and make people feel that those trial lawyers, that outside of Martians and maybe North Korean, well, maybe not North Koreans then, maybe it was still Russians or terrorists, that one could find maybe no worse group of people on the planet. And so that forced sort of our hand, me and my daughter, to sort of do what we could and, sort of settle and not really push, which we felt was necessary. Not a very good experience. We all have those stories to tell. There are our stories, and I think they're important to share, because what they do, I think, is that they help us first talk about them and share them, but they also help us deal with some of the characteristics associated with the medical industrial complex, having to do with feeling intimidated, fearful, angry, frustrated over the size, the power, the complexity, the bureaucracy, the lack of respect and transparency, the lack of input, the unfairness, and the cost and waste of money and time.
It's not loud enough.
How's this? Maybe I just needed to move it up. Sorry about that. Hopefully I don't have to start over, because I don't think I could quite make it. And so it's tough, right? It's very tough to deal with all of that. And that's why sharing our stories and coming together in community is so important, whatever that community is, but certainly a community that is assertive in trying to work for public policy changes like what you're trying to do and we're trying to do is so very important. In going through some files the other day, I came upon this little interesting packet, The Case for a Single-Payer Healthcare System, Reality versus Myth, calling for a Healthcare for All Ohioans Act. Remember that? Yeah. And among the many different spiffy kind of propaganda information materials was this. Remember this sort of window sign and some really wonderful information, and our Office of American Friends Service Committee was sort of in our part of the world, Summit County area, Portage County, the repository and receptacle where people who filled out petitions would send. And, it was a wonderful campaign in trying to change the rules of the game and trying to create a constitutional amendment here in Ohio. Now, this was, 2008 when that took place. The takeaways for me of that, even though that was campaign not successful, in terms of the ultimate achievement, nevertheless was successful because it planted seeds, did it not? It helped, I think, add to the integrity of the message, the integrity of those messengers, like all of you who were part of that campaign. And it showed the persistence and commitment that you all had exhibited to yourself, to others around you, to the community at large. And that's why that campaign, I think, was successful and should be seen as that and has served as a stepping stone for this very day and for what is to come. I don't see any balloons around here, and I can't understand why. Because today, right, is the 100th day of the Trump presidency. Yeah, you'd have to shoot it. Which, pretty amazing, isn't it? This paradox, I think, when you characterize the time we have of complete unpredictability of this guy in the Oval Office, but yet the paradox contrasts that with what I think can be totally expected in terms of giving over the keys to government, to the super duper rich and to the corporate crowd. But I think also one of the realities is that it helped, did it not, educate people that, oh my gosh, Obamacare and the ACA are actually one and the same? Yeah. Many people didn't know that. It also, though, helped tremendously in getting people to understand in a very real way that health care is extremely important. Is extremely important, particularly when there's a threat of having it taken away once given, in whatever inadequate form the ACA was given in. And that, I believe, is certainly a positive. For many people, it has become sort of a light bulb or one of these lights going on, that it is not just important, but a right, a sacred right, right? The Universal Declaration of Human Rights calls it that in Article 25. The 100 days, last 100 days, I think, has also been characterized of enormous resistance, including many new people who were not involved in organizing, in agitating, in educating. That resistance, though, by its definition, has been saying an awful lot no, right? It's been a movement characterized by resisting, reacting, and responding. And those are important. It's very important, right? When the house is burning, to put out the fire. When somebody is drowning, coming down the stream, to pull them out of the water. But I think the other very important principle, and this is where this movement of health care for all, and that which I and some others in this room have been a part of, move to amend in seeking a constitutional amendment that ends never intended inalienable constitutional rights for corporations and to end this bizarre doctrine that money is equal to free speech, shares. And that is to just respond, react, and resist only goes so far, right? At some point, you do get burned out. And in doing what I've done, and many of you, I'm sure, who have been doing what you've been doing in being involved in social change, you've seen those people who have come and gone if all they do is say no. What makes this movement so important and so vital and so relevant and so sustainable is that it's not just pointing out the problems of the healthcare industrial or sick care industrial, medical industrial complex, but it's saying yes to something. It's developing something that can be put on the shelf, but be pulled down at a moment's notice when the time is ripe. And the time is becoming more ripe. And that's where a Medicare for All system, HR 676, is all about. It's saying yes. It's a way to help take those who are coming into the movement as a result of what happened 100 days ago in the inauguration of Donald Trump, and help shift and move and transist and transform some of those people from just only resisting, from only responding, reacting to proacting. And that's why this is so important. A single-payer healthcare system is a prescription for healthy democracy and vice versa. A healthy democracy is a prescription for a single-payer health system. They are connected, they amplify, they reinforce one another. Each on its own, I believe, is incomplete without the other. Some have said, maybe you've heard the term, probably have, that our healthcare system or sick care system is a system to die for. Huh? Yeah. With the uninsured, underinsured, unsure, and death based on just inadequate care or no care, despite the ACA. This $3 trillion cost is just completely unacceptable for a system that is supposed to be the best in the world, that is hardly that, in the teens, according to, depending on who you talk to or what international agencies do the ranking. And the waste of, 30-some% or so is just unbelievable. How can that be accepted in any kind of legitimate system? It is a system, like so many systems and institutions in our society, where some people are played while others are paid. And those who are played are the users, us, for the most part, right? Where we are being played by hospitals and insurance companies and sometimes the doctor, although a lot of times the doctors are stuck in the systems that they are a part of. So we are the losers. We are the ones being played. But the winners, it's like with any system, right? Don't just look at the one side of the ledger. You've got to look at the other side. And boy, this system does produce a lot of winners. Comparatively speaking, not nearly as many losers, but no question. Insurance corporations, drug corporations, hospital corporations, CEOs are big winners, or should I say bigly winners. Insurance corporations, their profits, their income, they've made a killing on this system before ACA and including ACA. And there's all kind of numbers and statistics and stuff that we can get into if you're interested. Drug corporations, the same, in the hundreds of billions of dollars in profit and stock and the like. CEO pay, again, those numbers are mind-boggling when you compare it to the normal pay of the average stiff who's out there and who has to use the healthcare system. It's not the only reason by any means why our costs are the way they are, but it certainly does not help when you have a developer of Regeneron Pharmaceuticals, Leonard Schleifer, took home $47 million in total compensation in 2015. Up 13%, poor guy, was probably only making $40 million the year before. Also high on the list, and this comes from the left-wing radical Forbes magazine, Jeffrey Leiden of Vertex Pharmaceuticals took home a mere $28 million. So he's going to have to talk to his board of directors and say, hey, the guy next door made 47. That's in the pharmaceutical realm. In insurance, Aetna CEO Mark Bertolini made $28 million. United Health CEO Stephen Hemsley, a mere $20 million. Now again, this is before the replacement plan, right? Under Trump's replacement plan, while 24 million would lose their health care and a 750% increase in insurance costs would be produced for men who are 64 years old. The 400 wealthiest, if this would have come to pass, Americans would have gotten $7 million, $500 million in handouts to insurance corporation executives making over $500,000 a year. Not under $500,000, but over $500,000, with a total handout to the rich of $500 billion over 10 years. This was less a health care law, if that's what you wanted to call it, than it was just simply a tax cut to the super duper rich, not even the 1%ers. You know, the Occupy movement was right to a certain extent, 1%, but it's not even the 1%. It's the 1/10 of 1%, who are the ones that are really benefiting from the gaming of the rest of us. We're being played and they are being paid. How can this be, though? People want affordable and comprehensive health care. How can there be such a massive disconnect? Maybe some of you have seen this. According to the latest in January Pew Research Center, 60% of Americans say the government should be responsible for ensuring health care coverage for all Americans, compared with 38% who say this should not be the government's responsibility. 60%, and that includes 52% of Republicans with family incomes below 30 grand, right? So ideology is secondary to the pocketbook. So things are moving, and that 52% represents a dramatic increase from just recent times. But we're seeing a disconnect not just on this issue, on issue after issue, right? There is a growing and widening and deepening disconnect between what people want and the kind of policies we have or don't have on education, on mass transit, on the environment, on having jobs, on you name it. Issue after issue. On not bailing out banks, again. Polls are showing that those disconnects are widening. Yet, we still have policies that, for the most part, don't reflect those desires on the part of people across the political spectrum. Why not? Is it because just thinking about all of you and us involved in the healthcare movement that we're not educating properly? That people doing the educating aren't people with integrity? Or that there's no proven successful models in other nations? Are those the reasons? Well, no, of course not. The healthcare system is sick because our democracy is sick. Historian Edward Morgan has warned, government requires make-believe. Make-believe that the king is divine. Make-believe that he can do no wrong. Or make-believe that the voice of the people is the voice of God. Make-believe that the people have a voice. Or make-believe that the representatives of the people are the people. Make-believe that governors are the servants of the people. Make-believe that all men, and presumably women, are equal. And make-believe that they are not. Ours is a make-believe democracy. Quote unquote, if that's what you want to call it. What's left of it. What we ever had of it authentically to begin with. People are starting to get it, though. It's the flip side. People are understanding that, no children in here, right? Okay. That democracy is right up there with Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, and the Tooth Fairy. Okay? In terms of myth and lore. That we don't have anything approaching a real, authentic democracy. And some would claim we never had one. Researchers, maybe some of you have seen this, from Princeton University and Northwestern University did a study published a year and a half ago called Testing Theories of American Politics, where they analyzed 1,779 issues from 1981 to 2002. This was 8 years before the Citizens United versus FEC Supreme Court decision that worsened the problem and gave even more power and rights to wealthy individuals and corporate entities to hijack our elections. From their report, they said, despite the seemingly strong empirical support in previous studies for theories of majoritarian democracy, our analysis suggests that majorities of the American public actually have little influence over the policies our government adopts. America's claim to being a democratic society are seriously threatened when the preferences of economic elites and the stands of organized interest groups are controlled, for the preferences of the average American appear to have only a minuscule, near zero, statistically non-significant impact upon public policy, unquote. Near zero. You know, however, you don't have to be a PhD in, what are these guys? Political science, government, sociology, statistics, to know that. Those of us who have been trying to connect the disconnect and trying to reflect and trying to move our public officials in ways that a majority of the American public feel on issue after issue have run into that like a brick wall. We know there's a disconnect, and we know that our views and our voices are not authentically heard. That the influence and protections of insurance corporations, hospital corporations, pharmaceutical corporations, and the super rich, including CEOs of the medical industrial complex, their voices are the ones that are heard. They're the ones that are seated around the table when decisions are being made. They're the ones who are much more than simply influencing. They're governing. They're ruling. And they're doing it in a lot of different ways. And they're only able to do it because of these bizarre constitutional constructs that have given them these rights that were not intended. This thing called corporate personhood, for one, and this other thing called money being equated with free speech, for another. The former going back to the 1880s and having been literally then reinforced through hundreds of decisions over the past 130 years. And the other, money being equated to speech, that goes back to the 1976 Buckley versus Vallejo decision, when money at that time, almost like a pawn, right? For those who play chess, that make it to the end of the board that can be transformed into a queen. Super powerful. And that's what constitutional, quote unquote, rights have done. Money used to be just property, but now it's property and it's speech, so that the voices of those with money can be heard, and those who have the most money have the most speech. Last time I checked, that's not a real good definition of anything approaching an authentic democracy. And with corporations acquiring these never-intended constitutional rights, going back to an era when, at that time anyway, it was railroad corporate attorneys that for the most part sat in the robes, the 9 robed ones, were railroad attorneys. They have since become, they've diversified. They became oil attorneys who became judges who worked their way up or down the legal system to the Supreme Court, and other corporate attorneys who then donned those robes. And when donning them, then they anointed these bundles of property and of legal privileges and gave them rights that were intended only for you and me, real persons. Or I like to say, if you have a belly button, you're a real person. If you don't, you aren't. And these entities, last time I checked, are legal creations of the state. I don't think they have belly buttons. They certainly don't have consciences, yet they have been given, anointed by the courts. First Amendment, free speech rights. Fourth Amendment, search and seizure rights. Fifth Amendment, takings rights. 14th Amendment, due process and equal protection under the law rights. And along the way, just for good measure, 14th Amendment, as previously mentioned, but also Commerce Clause and Contracts Clause, misuses and preemptions and abuses that the courts have said, sure, not only can individuals have protections under the Commerce and Contracts Clause, but so can corporations. They have misused, they have abused, they've perverted, they've corrupted, they have hijacked. Pick your favorite adjective. Real, authentic democracy, to whatever extent we had it to begin with. And they have taken those rights that were meant and intended only for free people, and at the beginning, of course, it was only white male property owners that had those rights, about 5 to 8% in colonial times. But because of social movements, which is what this is all about, and what this movement is developing in terms of breadth and depth. But before us, those shoulders that we stand upon, it was previous movements that drove groups that should have been in the Constitution from day one into it. Women, people of color, people without property, acquired rights that they should have had all along. But now, thanks to Supreme Court decisions, now corporations have these rights. And the super-duper wealthy have these rights. And they've used them and misused them to obliterate us and hurt us and harm us in so many ways, including our health care. And how they've done it is through things like lobbying. Okay? In 2016, according to Open Secrets, if you look at the sectors in our society of those who spend money hiring lobbyists, guess what number the healthcare sector was? Number one. It used to be sort of a toss-up between the fire sector, finance, insurance, and real estate, and healthcare, or health, or sick, whatever you want to call it. Now it's number one. In 2016, $515 million invested in lobbying. Pharmaceutical and health products, subset of that, $245 million. Hospitals and nursing homes, their corporate entities, $94.8 million. Health professionals, presumably docs, maybe some of you in this room, $84.8 million. Health services and HMOs, $78 million. And all of that together totaling $515 million. The lobbying health industry has nearly 1,300 clients and a mere 2,747 registered lobbyists. If you're doing your math, that's 5 lobbyists for every member of Congress to get your voice, their voices heard. That's just lobbying. That's not even contributions or investments. Take your pick. There, in 2016, health political action committees contributed to federal candidates $55.7 million, and they like to cover all their bases. 40% of it went to Dems, 60% to Republicans. So you have the lobbying piece, you have the contribution / political investment piece in political elections. You also have what I call shields that they use, constitutional and legal shields that protect them from the rabble, from us. Things like the search and seizure rights, Fourth Amendment, to prevent you and I and the public from finding out what kind of mischief they're doing by claiming that not only do we have search and seizure rights, which actually anymore we don't, because of all of the spying and privacy. They're the ones that have got better search and seizure protections than we do. So never mind having equal rights, they have greater constitutional rights on that one. But they also, as of a couple years ago, acquired this new nifty right called religious rights. Ever hear of the Hobby Lobby decision? Case that federal law prohibited the Department of Health and Human Services from requiring closely held, for-profit secular corporations to provide contraceptive coverage as part of their employer-sponsored health insurance plans under the Affordable Care Act. Not just the owners of this privately held company, secular company, but the corporation itself now has religious rights. Just think of the potential. And they've used it, misused it, abused it in this way to deny employees, contraceptive corporations. But the potential abuse is limitless, not just on pertaining to health care, but for many other issues. Certainly one could claim that a corporation has a right for their religious beliefs not to pay people equitably, not to offer health insurance at all, not to provide safety concerns. Who knows what kind of justification may be in the offing, thanks to these religious rights. What has all this governing, influence, investments, and constitutional and legal shields yielded? The lobbying, the political contributions or investments, the shielding. Well, we don't have single payer, right? We don't even have a public option. There's no clawback of excessive compensation. We do have tort reform, quote unquote reform. There's limits, as of a couple of months ago, to class action lawsuits that certainly affect a lot of groups, not just and protect healthcare or health corporations. There's patent protections. So when pharmaceutical corporations develop something, they can protect that through that licensing or patenting that's much longer in this country than many other countries, with an enormous cost, particularly in the underdeveloped world, to people, which translates into lives. And there's federal subsidies, tremendous federal subsidies, to the medical industrial complex via government research. So the government does the research, and then that's privatized or corporatized by the medical system. So it's a nice little scheme they got, right? Socialism for corporations and capitalism for us. Or privatize the gains and socialize the pains. And that's how the system works. So what do? How do we respond? Corporate anthropologist Jane Ann Morris, who is connected to this, we were talking about it in the back before, what I call a think tank, corporate think tank called the Program on Corporations, Law, and Democracy, POCLAD, that I've been a part of for the past 20 years. She's been a part of that, was a part of that early on. Jane Ann Morris, look up her stuff. Democracy Theme Park, I think is her webpage, democracythemepark.org. Describes what she calls asymmetry between activist strategy and corporate strategy. Activists work reactively on one game or issue at a time. They try to play harder, try for bigger demos, more letters to elected officials, more experts at hearings around their single issues. Even if they share values and care about the same issues by working on just one issue, they are inevitably rivals for time, energy, and resources with other single-issue movements. They work vertically, not horizontally. Corporations don't do this for the most part. They work to change the ground rules for all games. Corporate ground rules are not intended so much to affect a particular issue, though they do that, as to frustrate and dilute people's efforts over a broad range of issues. A corporation does not have a separate team of lawyers, experts, lobbyists, and public relations persons for each chemical dumped or environmental calamity that takes place, for each labor law violation, for each food safety violation in each place or each community. Most of what corporate strategies do is they work across the board in ways that not only helps the particular corporation in a particular place, but makes corporations in general, across the board, more powerful. So that when you have tort reform, that helps all corporations, not just whatever company that originally challenged it. when you have efforts that make it easier, or more difficult, I should say, to have to bring lawsuits, particularly coming together in class action, that makes it harder for us to bring justice through the courts and makes it easier for all corporations. Social movements are the elixir or the prescription to our challenge, to challenge this thing of corporate rule, to challenge this constitutional doctrine of money equaling free speech. And I believe, as I wrap up, that there are two kinds of social movements that we have to be a part of simultaneously: a vertical and a horizontal movement. The vertical movement is something like what a single-payer healthcare system is trying to accomplish. So here I don't totally agree with Jane Ann Morris. I think she's largely right in saying that focusing on the ground rules in ways that help all corporations certainly is more strategic. But at the same time, I don't think we can ignore these quote-unquote single-issue movements for a variety of reasons, because those single-issue movements, like the movement for a single-payer healthcare system, have some advantages and meet some criteria that these vertical kinds of movements that are trying to change ground rules simply don't have. Here are some examples. That when you're focused on things like a single-payer health care, like bringing about education for all, like bringing about efforts that improve the climate in substantial ways, as we're seeing. What that does is it puts a human face on issues. It helps people comprehend what's going on here and now. It allows for some short-term victories. It helps humanize the challenges ahead. Working on vertical issues, campaign finance reform, changing the Constitution to abolish corporate personhood and money as speech, those on the surface can appear to be, what in the world are you talking about? How in the world can we do that? I can't wrap my head around that. How does a corporation have a constitutional right? How is money equal to speech? What do you mean by that? But when you can connect it, when you can show, in fact, through a single movement, the possibilities, but also the limitations, that quite honestly, it's hard to get from point A to point B without, at least easily, without changing some of the ground rules. I think that's the advantage. Now, having said that, of course, social movements around single issues can be effective and have been effective. They're just much harder. And as I conclude, let me just leave you with this. There have been some nonviolent historians and researchers out there who have studied social movements and are still doing it. People like Gene Sharp, Mark and Paul Engler, a guy named George Lakey, all of whom, by the way, are Quakers. But also, more recently, a woman named Erica Chenoweth, who was a Gulf War, Iraq War vet, who have looked at and tried to deconstruct of how social movements become effective. What are the stages toward getting from an idea to actually a reality? And what they've concluded is basically you need two steps. One is through education and advocacy and organizing, all the kinds of things that we do. You do need to have a majority of people behind you. I mean, there's no question about that. And in fact, a supermajority doesn't hurt. Of 60%, 70%, 80%. But as we know, there can still be that disconnect. That's where the second part comes in, and that's where Erica Chenoweth, her recent research, has laid things out. She claims the second piece of that is that you need somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 4% of that supermajority who are the hardcore, who are the people who are willing to make it, this, that movement, that issue, that concern, their pseudo-life, virtually, where they make it full-time, where they take extra risks of investing their time, resources, where they risk arrest, where they're willing to literally put their bodies on the line. It may not always come to that, but throughout history, that's oftentimes how it has worked. So we need, as a movement, I think both of those criteria. Whether we work vertically on a single issue or horizontally on an issue that's trying to change the ground rules. Someone connected to Move to Amend has said, whatever your first issue is, make this your second issue. Because whatever it is we're trying to do, it's going to make it a whole lot easier if we can abolish corporate constitutional rights and money is speech. So I ask you and challenge you and respectfully request of you to consider that. And if interested, let me know. And I end here. What's going on today in Washington? Anybody know? Climate change march. They're there, we're here. But are we not also trying to change the climate? I think so. That's a different kind of, use of that term, right? The kind of climate we're trying to change is the political climate. It's maybe the most important, not just for healthcare, but for all movements. Because I know some of the people connected to POCLAD and those who mentored me along the way, a guy named Richard Grossman and Ward Morehouse, have said that changing the legal system, changing the constitutional system, changing the economic system is all secondary. You've got to first change the culture. If you can change the culture, if you can make people start thinking of what was yesterday impossible is basically inevitable today, the rest will fall in line. And it'll happen, as Gene Sharp, the nonviolent historian, says, much faster than you think. And he has said that usually for successful social movements to happen, it takes much longer for that trigger to happen, for that 100th monkey, for that tipping point to occur, for the woman who decides she's not going to get up and move to the back of the bus. That it takes a lot longer for that tipping point to happen. But when it happens, then for that movement to move to fruition, it happens much more rapidly. It certainly is the case. The Berlin Wall falling, and in so many other movements. So our challenge, I think, and what this movement has done and is doing and continues to do, whether you realize it or not, and I'm somewhat on the outside looking in, and therefore maybe have a little different perspective, you are working to change the climate and are being successful at changing the climate. The climate that is making healthcare a human right. And once that idea gets embedded and truly planted in not just the head, but the heart and the guts of people, you will win. And we will win. And the movement that is successful at doing that will win. So the challenge in creating a single-payer health care system is to improve the health of the body. What Move to Amend is trying to do is improve the health of the body politic. Together, we can do both. Thank you.